everyone, it's Catching Tease here. Welcome to my channel where today we are loving on Yeosang as a vocalist because he deserves it. This man's voice is just phenomenal and I need more people to talk about it, so that's what we're doing. And before people start wondering, yes, I do plan on covering all of the vocalists in ATEEZ. This will be a series. I already have an obscene amount of notes on the other members. This is a brainworm I've had for probably way too long, let's be real, but I just had this primal urge to make an extremely self-indulgent series, okay? And there is literally no better time for me to start this because not only did ATEEZ just come back, but it's also Yeosang's birthday this week, so like stars are aligning, how could I not? But in all seriousness, I think this is a topic that I'll be able to do some justice to because I do have a bit of a vocal background. It's not like super extensive and I am by no means a professional, but it's enough that I think I'll be able to present some interesting points that some people who don't have a vocal background wouldn't quite be able to recognize. Also, the way I'm doing this video, I'm going to be playing some clips of ATEEZ songs as examples, but they're probably going to be cut very short and very weirdly just to avoid copyright issues because I swear KQ has it out for me. But I will list all of the songs and the sections where those snippets appear at the top of the screen if you want to go and listen to those parts in full, which I would actually highly suggest you do if you aren't intimately familiar with their music, but you want to fully understand what I'm talking about, or if you just want to listen to Yeosang's voice more, which, like, fair enough, I don't blame you. Now, aside from it being his birthday this week, I knew I wanted to start with Yeosang in particular because he gets the least lines out of the group, but his voice is fascinating to me, and I think there's been some very interesting developments over the last year. So, yeah, let's get into it. So the way I want to do this series is to start by picking one particular trait that I think is central to the vocalist, provide some examples, have any other sections mentioning any other notable traits that I find, and then talk about some things that I would like to see from them in the future to wrap it all up. So for Yeosang's vocal point, I went with depth because, I mean, duh, who's shocked? No one. Yeosang easily has the lowest range of all of the vocalists. If they really let him go for it, this man's voice is low enough for me to feel it in my soul and shake my ribcage. Okay, so Yeosang has a deep voice. Great job, Catching Tease. The sky is blue. But I also want to discuss his depth not just in terms of pitch, but also tone, because there's something interesting going on there. Quick crash course on the basics of vocal tone and placement for those of you who don't know much about that. One aspect of tone is usually described on a spectrum from something like bright to dark or nasal to deep. So brighter nasal tones have what's called a forward placement typically, where you can feel the sound resonating closer to your nose than the back of your throat, and they can also be exaggerated by using wider vowel shapes where the corners of your mouth pull out. If you want to hear what a bright tone sounds like, look no further than musical theater. Deep tones, on the other hand, sit further back in their placement, so more towards the back of the throat, and they can be emphasized by using rounded vowels that tuck the corners of the mouth in. So think more like the stereotypical opera sound. This is an incredibly simplified explanation, but I am just looking for you to get the general idea here, okay? Cool. Yeosang hasn't really stuck to any one vocal tone, and I don't know if that's intentional on his part, or the producer's part, or if he just hasn't had enough vocal experience to really settle on one style consistently. At first I was inclined to believe the latter, but looking at any time he sings outside of a studio, it seems like he naturally falls to the deeper side, and even his studio vocals as of late have also been on the deeper side. That makes me think that the producers or the vocal coaches at KQ were purposely trying to get him to sing in a lighter and more nasal tone in the past, along with the fact that they weren't giving him lines in his range, essentially forcing him to sing in a brighter tone in order to avoid damaging his, let's be real, pretty untrained voice at the time. And if you aren't convinced that pitch plays a role in Yeosang's tone, check out this cover of Paul Kim's Me After You. The lowest notes are pretty deep in tone because they kind of have to be for him to be able to hit those pitches, but he slowly gets brighter as the notes get higher until he hits the highest notes where his tone is significantly brighter than before. However, that cover is also fairly old. It's from 2020, and Yeosang's voice has developed a ton since then.
이제 뭘 어떻게 해야 할지 모르겠어 내 곁에 있어줘 내게 머물러줘 네가 없는 날
That's not to say that he doesn't sing bright at all anymore. He absolutely does at times, especially when singing higher notes.
소리가 가라앉는 습에 지난 겨울도 그 지난 겨울도
But generally, his notes have started getting lower and lower, which makes his tone deeper and deeper. And recently, he's singing in deeper tones during live stages, even if the notes do sit a bit higher.
좋지 않은 바보들 좀 봐. 이건 무슨 일이야? 아무도 웃지 않는 밤 이곳은 frozen night.
There's this lovely little compilation from YouTuber A2Z that perfectly illustrates how his live vocals have changed over time.
아름다운 건 나. 전부 네 거니까.
Even in the recordings of their more recent releases, there is still a noticeable difference in how Yeosang sings.
우리가 봤지 너의 손같이 멀어지는 waterfall 끝이 없는 free fall
We'll see if that trend continues into their new mini, but I think the biggest thing to note here is that even if he is singing in a tone that's nasal for him, it's still gonna sound darker than like half of the group because his voice is just naturally that deep and rich. Even if someone is singing low or even mid-range notes with Yeosang, like 7 or 8 times out of 10, he's just going to sound fuller than them in that range. However, I want to point out that this deep tone of his still isn't entirely unique within the group. In fact, there are several deep voices within ATEEZ, Mingi being the first one that comes to mind, but since Mingi isn't a vocalist, I'm not counting him, sorry, maybe later. But Songhwa is the only other vocalist in ATEEZ that I would consider consistently super deep in tone, so what makes Yeosang distinct from Songhwa? When I eventually get around to Songhwa's video, I'll go into this in depth, but his voice always sounds very heavy. There's this immense weight to the lines that he delivers, and you can almost feel the effort that he puts in while singing. Yeosang, on the other hand, has an incredibly soft voice, almost to the point where it sounds like he's even whispering sometimes. Where Seonghwa punches out each of his notes, Yeosang lets a lot of his float out to the point where it sounds too easy. He does still have weight in some of his lines, especially when he's forced to sing notes above his comfortable range, but even then there's this smoothness and almost fuzziness to his voice that gives it an entirely different functionality from Seonghwa's. Not to mention that his slight lisp takes the edge off of literally any S consonant that he sings, which, if you weren't aware that Yeosang has a lisp, you're welcome. You'll never be able to unhear it now.
Look at the other first side. What is going on right now?
But there's a reason that despite both being capable of a similar deep tone, they give Yeosang all of the whispery lines and Seonghwa all of the yelling lines. And yes, I know that Yeosang sometimes joins in on the yelling, but I think that's more because they're just trying to give him any lines that they can. So that doesn't really count in my book. Just let my man sing, will you? So I talked about what makes Yeosang and Seonghwa different, but they're also often paired together because they have that one element of depth in common, which makes it easier to transition smoothly from one member to another without disrupting the flow of the song.
I'm the one in my zone. 초췌한 바보들 좀 봐. Every day, every night. Are you there? How you feel?
This also happens with Yuno a lot because Yuno's voice shares the smoothness quality and sometimes the depth.
막아서지 말아게 비해 지난 나는 이제 빨리가 We don't want no trouble Just moving forward
Yeah, 어지러운 남 Yeah, how can I stop?
빨려들어 난 다른 세계로 빨려들어 난 다른 세계로
Yuno's voice is honestly so versatile that he serves as the perfect tie between any of the members, and Yeosang is the hardest to tie with someone else, so it makes sense that Yuno is usually on one end of Yeosang's lines. But putting all three of them together, oof, there is a reason that the beginning of New World feels so grand and powerful.
Hello world Can't you see Work a word How do you feel 눈을 떠진 쉴드가 마주할 때
Not even kidding. When I started this channel, my best friend was like, I'm gonna try listening to K-pop, and she stumbled across New World and texted me like, oh my god, who is that singing in the beginning? And then we proceeded to spend the next half hour gushing about Yeosang, so yeah, pretty impactful, I'd say.
멈추고 싶은 순간이 와도
Looking back through their discography, I noticed this really interesting dichotomy between Yeosang and two of the other members. Now, I'm going to start with Jongho because as soon as I get started on what's happening with Hongjoong, I might not stop. So, Jongho, he is loud and bombastic and very in your face with his vocals, unless it's like a ballad or something, but that's his job as a main vocalist. He also has very forward placement, so very bright and very powerful. His voice is sharp and it just rings in the air. The way that they use Jongho is pretty much the opposite of how they use Yeosang, and that's intentional. They do it to add contrast to their songs. You know how I was talking about tying each member together to pass off lines smoothly? Yeah, this is what they do when they want the opposite and they want to suddenly build energy out of nowhere. They stick these two together.
언제든지 찾아갈게 너의 곁으로 느낄 수 있어 너를 느끼는 순간 날 이끄는 중력 같은 너 Oh stay with the feeling like I do
I know how I was talking about New World feeling grand because of Yuno, Yeosang, and Seonghwa all singing in their deep tones together. Well, I was omitting Jongho's impact there because he joins Yeosang's second line in a really clever way. Yeosang's first line is super low and deep, and it only spans the range of 3 notes, so he essentially sounds like a buzzing hum. But in his second line, he jumps up the octave, and the pitches of the notes become a lot more varied. That alone would be enough to change the energy of the song, but we also get the addition of Jongho, who's up the octave from Yeosang, who just jumped the octave himself. So we get 3 octaves in the span of 6 seconds, which is wild enough, but I also want you to pay attention to how differently Yeosang sings when Jongho joins. Because Jongho's voice is so bright and powerful, and he's singing higher notes, an entire octave above Yeosang, he's going to be the most prominent voice to the point where he risks drowning out anyone else singing with him. So Yeosang has to change how he's singing in order to be heard. But the way that he does it here is just, This is what I want to hear from him, because it would have been so easy for him to resort to that super nasal tone to help his voice cut through more, but he didn't. And thank God for that, because I think that what he actually does is a much better alternative. No, instead, it seems as if Yeosang has discovered the wonders of an engaged diaphragm and is using it to the fullest to put a lot more power behind his voice. Yes, he does get a little brighter in tone, but I think that's mainly due to his use of wider vowels, and the effect is largely offset by how heavily he's leaning into his chest voice here. This is probably the most powerful I've heard his voice, especially while singing, not shouting, and especially while in a range that isn't, the bottom of the ocean, and I would like to hear more of this. But moving on from New World, I want to talk about how Yeosang and Jongho are used as a brilliant misdirection in Say My Name, because it's fantastic. Listen to how Songhwa, Jongho, and Yeosang trade off the energy here. It starts with Songhwa's weighty delivery, and then Jongho spikes the energy out of nowhere with his high notes. After that, Yeosang reels the energy back into a slower simmer and leaves it almost lurking in the background. That is until the beat just cuts out entirely with Wooyoung and then just drops into the chorus. What's interesting about this is that most people would have switched Jongho and Yeosang's parts to explode into the chorus, but this swap leaves us wondering when the pre-chorus will stop building and building and finally hit the drop. It's one of the main reasons that the chorus feels like you just got blindsided by a freight train. Say My Name is a throttling misdirection of a song, and this is a huge cause for it. It's genius. The entire thing is genius. But do you want to know what's even more genius? Hongjoong and Yeosang together. Because when it's used right, it's the same effect but on freaking steroids. It's only really happened twice, but I literally just figured out that Yeosang is partially responsible for why these two Hongjoong raps are some of my favorites, and I needed to scream about this revelation, so here we go. Let's start with Fireworks. Here is Yeosang's part first. We listened to this earlier, but just to remind you. So it's like super deep and soothing, right? It's like borderline lullaby material the way that he sings it. It's purposely soothing you into this false sense of security and calmness before Hongjoong comes in to light things up. I want you to pay attention to how the energy immediately shifts when he comes in. Of course, there's some help from the instrumental, but it's clear that Hongjoong's voice is responsible for kicking things up a notch. And that's mainly because of these 3 qualities that go from 0 to 100 between Yeosang and him. First off, the difference in syllables per second. Notice how Yeosang's lines come out very slow and almost gooey is the way that I would describe it. It reminds me of how melted chocolate sort of like flows down off the spoon in those fancy chocolate commercials. Hongjoong, on the other hand, not so much. He has a lot of words coming at you very fast, and it's pretty choppy the way that he delivers it. Secondly, we have the difference in tone, because I don't know if you've noticed, but Hongjoong has a very nasal voice. He is easily the most nasal in all of ATEEZ, and as we've established, Yeosang is not that. Putting these two next to each other is like night and day. While Yosong's deep tone is responsible for soothing you, Hongjoong's nasal tone is equally purposeful in how it jolts you out of that trance in order to create that energy out of nowhere. And then lastly, we have the difference in vowels. This one is kind of the same as the tone thing, since the change in vowel shapes just serves to exaggerate those differences, but it polarizes the two even further. Yosong's vowels are really rounded here, whereas Hongjoong's are incredibly flat and wide. I mean, listen to the difference in how they pronounce the vowel A here. Sure, the auto-tune is amplifying the effect even more, but I think it's safe to say that there is a clear difference in their vowels and that difference is helping the tone shift build that energy. So that was a lot of talking for like 8 seconds of a song, but we're about to do it all over again because guess what? Thanks is even wilder somehow. Yeah, Fireworks was the tame example. The dynamic between them in Thanks is unparalleled. The song itself starts off right away and it doesn't give you time to breathe, so we don't really get a chance to chill until Yosong comes in after Songhwa. Yes, that was the chill part. For those of you who haven't listened to Thanks, that's about as chill as it gets the entire time. Notice how Yosong's lines are descending and his voice is a lot softer than Songhwa's lines before him. There's that difference between the two of them that I was talking about earlier in action. So that combined with the repetition of the descending notes once again creates that lulling effect. So you can guess how Hongjoong is going to come in here. Yeah, entirely opposite of that. Those three differences that I was talking about earlier, syllables, tone, and vowels, are all here, but there's even more happening this time with the way that everything just careens to a stop before Hongjoong hits his little giggle. The beat cuts out entirely, the instrumental is reduced to a single downward warp, and Hongjoong comes droning in on this single vowel before just going off and bringing the beat back from nothing. The entire song legit just stops while Hongjoong steals it away from Yosong. You can literally hear him encroaching on Yosong's second line in the background. The way that Hongjoong rips the wheel out of Yosong's hands, slams on the brakes, and then goes full pedal to the metal not even a second later makes the entire thing just absolutely electric. I need them to do this again because the fact that it's only happened like twice in a song is a crime. Basically, TLDR, Hongjoong and Yosong are polar opposites in just about every way, and I want more of them together. Yes, this one song gets its own section. If you're not familiar with ATEEZ, or if you're a new fan, you might be confused about why Halazia is such a big deal. Sure, he has a deep voice and it sounds great, but why is that huge? See, this is the first time that this man has gotten a big part in his unique range in a title track. The first time. He sings about 19.8 seconds in that song, and that is the most he has ever gotten in a Korean title track. Like, by far, if we ignore his chanting in Eternal Sunshine. Yeah. He is one of the most hypnotizing voices in ATEEZ, dare I say in all of K-pop, and it took 4 years, 2 months, and 6 days to give him substantial lines that sound like that. We could have been doing this so much sooner, and yes, that makes me want to cry, but I'm glad that we're at least getting it now. To me, Halazia feels like a tentative turning point. I'm not sure if they'll continue in this direction. God, I hope they do. But it feels like they finally figured out how to use Yosong in a way that isn't just miscellaneous ending lines or ballads. Yosong is now substantial title track material as long as they write songs that complement his voice, which kind of leads me into what I want to see from him moving forward. I'm gonna warn you, I have a lot to say in this section because I am a wanting woman when it comes to Yosong's voice. Yeosang's voice. I feel like I need to specify that or otherwise it'll be taken out of context. And I promise I am not that kind of K-pop stan, okay? First off, I would love to see him utilized in a similar way as Felix from Stray Kids. Not the same way because Felix's voice is a lot harsher, but similar. I feel like Halazia was Yeosang's 5-star Michelin moment, so I'm waiting for his maniac chorus moment, if you get what I mean. I'm not saying he needs to have all of the lines. In fact, he really shouldn't because he's like last on the totem pole of vocalist positions and he needs to work on his stability, but the few lines that you do give him need to have an impact. With a voice like his, it seems like such a waste to give him lines that are either speaking or whispering or shouting. Don't get me wrong, those lines can be really cool and effective sometimes, but when it's over half of what he gets to perform, it just feels like we could be doing so much more here. Another thing I am absolutely fiending for is Yeosang's falsetto because, guys, I have combed through every second of ATEEZ's discography, and correct me if I am wrong, but we have never heard his falsetto? The closest I can find is Paradigm's Bridge and possibly the beginning of Sector 1 if that's even him doing the higher notes in the backing vocals. Criminal. Can you imagine how pretty his falsetto would be? Actually, we don't have to entirely imagine it because it pops up for like 2 seconds in that Me After You cover that I mentioned earlier. But I need more of it. Preferably in an actual ATEEZ song, because that may have only been 2 seconds, but it was a glorious 2 seconds. Also, hear me out, Yeosang singing jazz. Because I don't think I've said this before, but I have a jazzy ATEEZ agenda, and if you don't understand, then go listen to White Love right now. I mean right now. They all sound fantastic, but Yeosang was given lines that were way too high for him in that style, so I need to hear him singing jazz, but as a bass this time. Make it happen, KQ. One last small thing I think would be cool to see is giving him more ascending lines because he almost never gets them, and the only time that we hear him sing ascending lines is when it's not in his range. Pretty much all of his lower lines are descending, where they either start in the mid-range and go down, or just start low and go even lower. And like, I understand why, otherwise it would cause the melody to jump pretty far pitch-wise, and you usually don't want that for continuity's sake unless it's for like a high note or something, but come on, this is K-pop and this is ATEEZ for crying out loud. Let's do some experimenting and treat low notes like high notes. Give the basses their moment. I want to see it. Like, just picture this with me for a moment, okay? Just for one song. I just want to hear it for one song out of nowhere. Have Yeosang just start down in the pits of hell and then gradually rise up to a mid-range pitch to pass it off. I want it. I want it so bad. But the thing that I really want most of all is just for KQ and ATEEZ to actually write lines made for Yeosang in particular, because he has a very particular and unique voice that they could be doing so many cool things with instead of just leaving him in the corner because they don't know what to do with him. But as I said earlier, Halazia felt like them finally working something out, so hopefully after seeing the very positive reaction to his part there, we'll start seeing some justice for Yeosang and his amazing voice. So that's what I have for Yeosang's analysis. This is probably going to be the shortest in the series just because Yeosang doesn't really have lines, which kind of scares me because if I can make this long of a video from like 10 minutes of vocals, I am terrified to see how long my video for San is gonna be. He's like probably the most complex voice in ATEEZ and he gets a lot of lines, so I am genuinely worried it's gonna come out to like 2 hours. Pray for my soul. But that does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about Yeosang in the comments down below. Is there something that you would like to add, or did I point out something that you've never really noticed? You know I'm always looking for more people to stream about ATEEZ with, so please don't be shy. Also, I'm planning on doing Wooyoung next, so if you have any points that you want me to bring up, drop those too. Anyways, if you liked the video, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel as it really helps me out. Thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you all next time. Bye!